I'm honored to be here this afternoon to welcome you to this panel, Oil, Fracking, and Man Camps, Human Health Along the Pipelines. And it's a really great pleasure for me to introduce you to our two panelists, Lissa Yellowbird-Chase and HolyElk Lafferty. Lissa is an enrolled member of the three affiliated tribes up at Fort Berthold, the Hidatsa, Arikara, and Mandan people. And as many of you probably know, the Fort Berthold Reservation is on the Bakken oil range. In 2014, Lissa founded the Sahnish Scouts, and Sahnish means people in Arikara, which is a volunteer organization dedicated to finding missing and murdered people in and around the Bakken Range. What began as a North Dakota operation has now expanded to South Dakota, Montana, Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska. Due to social chaos created by the imposition of thousands of men into fossil fuel extraction work locations in the oil and gas fields, acts of violence increase in local communities. And these acts of violence affect everyone, local non-natives and natives, and the oil workers themselves. And this is true, but we thought it would be important to help us be in sight of the continued and intensified violence perpetrated against Native American people, in particular by the creation of these man camps along the pipelines. And this is not something that's far away. 6 hours drive from here, you could reach the back 40 gold, silver, and copper mine that's planned on the Menominee River that separates the UP, Michigan UP, and the northern Wisconsin border. Aquila Corporation of Toronto has acquired 3 of the 4 permits necessary to begin an enormous open pit mine 6 hours from here to pull out gold and silver. To do that, they're going to have to fill in an enormous acreage of wetlands. And not to mention the fact that they're going to be digging through ancestral burial grounds and dance circles of the Menominee people. So this is going to be a repeat of Standing Rock. The dredging will kill, it's estimated that the dredging is going to impact aquatic and animal life on the Menominee. But more to the point of our discussion today, the Black 40 mine will bring massive man camps to the region, close by, and bringing all of that chaos experienced in the Bakken. And just this morning, Lissa and HolyElk and I were in a meeting with Heather Miller, who's the director of the American Indian Center here in Chicago. And she said they're already bracing here, the indigenous community in Chicago, and it's like 30,000 people. They're already bracing for this. Because what it means, even though it might be 6 hours away, what it means is that human trafficking, drug trafficking, and sex slavery can impact the indigenous community here in Chicago. It's also important to realize that this is not just a North American phenomenon. There are man camps disrupting community life at oil and gas rigging sites around the world. And North American Native people aren't the only indigenous people suffering these impacts. The Sami people in the Arctic regions of Russia, Norway, Sweden, and Finland are suffering. The Anu people in Japan on the Sakhalin Islands are suffering the effects of man camps due to drilling. So what we're talking about today is not just on the Bakken, and it's not just forthcoming 6 hours from here, but it's a world phenomenon. And while it's true that the violence impacts Native women and men alike, we just thought it was important to keep in sight the special vulnerability of Native women and girls, the vulnerability that they experience as a result of climate change-related fossil fuel industries. No one knows the exact number of Native women and girls who are missing today, many missing due to the chaos created by the fossil fuel industry. Estimates in Canada run between 1,000 and 2,000. Estimates in the Dakotas and surrounding states run between 125 and 200. No one knows the exact number because the federal governments do not care. The federal registries, there are no federal registries in the US or Canada for missing Indigenous people. So Lissa is here to help us understand this terrible reality from her personal experience on the ground. She is literally not a bounty hunter, but a body hunter. HolyElk Lafferty is an enrolled member of the Cheyenne River tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. She's been a longtime activist for Native American rights and comes from a long family tradition of courageous resistance to injustice against Native people. I see that some of you here are old enough to remember the 76-day occupation of Wounded Knee by Native American people in 1973. 200 Native people occupied the village of Wounded Knee on the Pine Ridge Reservation of South Dakota. They demanded that the U.S. government honor its treaty responsibilities to the sovereign nation of the Oglala Lakota people under the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. One of those 200 brave souls was HolyElk's mother, Bernie, who traveled here with HolyElk, but isn't with us this afternoon because she walked too much yesterday and she was a little bit sore, I guess. Bernie was there. And sadly, two Native people were killed, if you remember, by government troops during that siege. And one of those was Buddy Lamont, who was Bernie's uncle and HolyElk's great uncle. So as I said, HolyElk comes to us with a legacy of great Native American courage and spiritual depth. It was that courage that moved her to resist government oppression at Standing Rock on February 1st, 1917, and protect the last child camp that was being erected to defend the people preparing for eviction from the Oceti, Sakowin, and Rosebud camps. HolyElk was arrested. She was charged with a Class C felony for inciting a riot, and she's currently facing a trial that could put her in prison for 5 years. For HolyElk and Lissa, the violence that has accompanied the fossil fuel industry in Indian country is not new. Native people have been enduring violence of colonization for 400 years. But that doesn't make the reality any less personal for them, and it hasn't made them capitulate. So HolyElk and Lissa are here to share with us their experience of the health challenges that come with the fossil fuel industry. The work they have been doing to combat these challenges, and the pride that they feel in doing this work as spiritually strong Native American women. So please join me in welcoming Lissa Yellowbird-Chase and HolyElk Lafferty to Loyola University. So I think our plan was to have HolyElk and Lissa speak, and then we will open it up for discussion.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Actually, it's not on.
It's not on?
There's a button there.
Okay. Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. Okay.
Move it up close. There you go.
Okay, thank you for having us. We're very honored to be here today. My name is HolyElk Lafferty. I am Minikoju, Oglala, and Sichangu Lakota from South Dakota. We have a couple updates. Mike was saying that you may want an update on the legal situations with the water protectors that were arrested in Standing Rock. So I have a pamphlet that you can find online by going to WPLC, the Water Protector Legal Collective website. You can get all of this information. I'm just going to read off of here. And then also to clarify that I was actually not charged with any felonies. My charges are misdemeanors. So I just want to go through this really briefly, and then we can move on to the heart of what Lissa and I have come here to share with you today. As this information was published a month ago, as it stands right now, there have been 314 dismissed cases of water protectors in relation to no dabble. There were 20 acquitted at trial, 62 pre-trial diversion, 116 plea agreements, 13 convicted at trial, and so there's a total of 526 concluded cases right now. Furthermore, there are 201 open and proceeding to trial, 102 inactive warrant status, and 4 on appeal to the North Dakota Supreme Court. There is an update on a few special cases. Red Fawn Phallus is awaiting sentencing on May 31st of 2018. Under her plea agreement, prosecutors will recommend 7 years in prison to an indigenous woman who was protecting the water, who's now going to spend, up to 7 years in prison, away from her son, away from her family. These are our realities. Michael Littlefeather is awaiting sentencing on May 30th of 2018. Under his plea agreement, there will be a joint recommendation of 36 months in prison. Michael Rattler Marcus is awaiting sentencing on May 29th of 2018. Under his plea agreement, there will be a joint recommendation of 36 months in prison. Dion Ortiz, sorry, that's the wrong name. Brennan, everybody, if you follow him on social media, he's Bravo 1, Brennan Estachio, and James Angry Bird White are all preparing for a trial. Oh, so Dion Ortiz was a separate name. So there are 3 water protectors there that are still awaiting trial. You can find all of this additional information if you go to the waterprotectorlegal.org. And they're still accepting donations and in need of funds. They're doing a lot of hard work for, as you can see, hundreds of water protectors. So if you're still looking to support, you can access them at waterprotectorlegal.org. And then my update on my charges. I'm just going to I was a little uncomfortable speaking freely on my own about my legal case, so I had the lawyers, they wrote up something for me to just read. Okay, so because the facts are quite similar in HolyElk Lafferty's case and Chase Iron Eye's case, an agreement was reached that the discovery process would be the same in the 2 cases. As soon as discovery is complete and all pretrial motions are resolved, the 2 cases will go to trial, with the Iron Eyes case going first. At this time, the Iron Eyes trial is scheduled in August to be followed shortly thereafter by the Lafferty trial. If there is a not guilty verdict in the Iron Eyes trial, the prosecutor may well dismiss the Lafferty case. The state's attorney or prosecutor are not cooperating in the discovery process. At each step in the process, that office has either failed to do what was agreed upon by the defendants and the prosecutor, or has performed at the absolute minimum level, denying the defendants evidence that they are entitled to. A hearing is scheduled for the judge on April 4th to address the prosecutor's obstruction of discovery. In the face of this obstruction, the attorneys for Chase and HolyElk are now pursuing discovery without the cooperation of the prosecutor. Subpoenas for documents have gone out to federal agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, to state agencies, including the Governor of North Dakota, and to local agencies, including the Martin County Sheriff's Department. The attorneys have also gathered extensive evidence from within Tiger Swan, the lead mercenary group involved at Standing Rock. So I hope that was informative for you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna, since I just did a lengthy piece there, I'm gonna go ahead and just pass it over to Lissa to shift us in a different direction. Maybe easier just to hold it.
Really?
Feels kind of awkward. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's not spill here. I have a habit of that. Okay, let's do that. Okay, so, hello, thanks for having us. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the interest in what's going on, not only in our environment, but in Indian country as well. Whether it be Indian country out in North Dakota or up north, but we also have an Indian country here in the metropolitan areas too, if you didn't know that. And those are places where First Nations, indigenous people, their circles are, so that's kind of a Indian country in the metro area. So I would just want to thank you for having us and listening to our stories. I founded a company, LLC, back in 2014 out of a demand from the public who found out what we were doing, trying to locate missing and murdered individuals as a result of the oil-filled influx of people that came from all over the United States. And I would just like to take a moment. This started out as like a one-man project. I lured my children into it, so I'd like to take a moment, not only to recognize my sister here, HolyElk, for being a great mentee and offering her and her companions support and knowledge and skills that they have to help support finding and locating missing and murdered relatives. But I'd like to take a moment before I forget to recognize my two sons who have been here with me since the beginning. They're kind of born and bred in the search and recovery feature, so I don't think they realize the caliber of their involvement. But I have my son Obadiah Pipeboy here, if you could stand up. And this is my baby, Micah Pipeboy. And I would like to recognize my sister's companion, Angelo Sison. So just to clarify some of the things we do, we saw a need for, at the time that the boom was happening in the Bakken, our financial crisis out here in the real world, there was families that didn't have the resources, and their sons mostly had migrated to the Bakken oil fields to try and get some kind of jobs, because our job market was pitiful at that time. So we had this literal influx of people that came from all over the country, some from all over the world. And so what happened was, basically when the height of the boom started, and I remember some of the oil field personnel actually saying this: if you had a heartbeat and you were breathing, you're good enough for them. Which tells you a lot, because there wasn't a lot of background checks. There wasn't a lot of maintaining safety issues and whatnot. Along with that, you have a circle of predatory people. We had a lot of pedophiles that had moved into our area, sex offenders, drug dealers, murderers, people that committed property crimes, drugs, a lot of drug. And the network that used to bypass North Dakota, which we once thought was safe, was horrifyingly brought to our attention that we no longer had a safety net. We were a community that when you went to bed, you left your doors open. You never had to lock your car. We're not that kind of community anymore, and we had to learn through a hard, long process that our safety was in jeopardy by this new influx of people. Now, for any criminal justice students or anything, our law enforcement and our judicial process was not ready for this influx of people. We didn't have the probationary or the court services or law enforcement for that matter. So basically our communities became a three-ring circus, any which way you looked at it. Our communities, where I'm from, we have our own set of problems that were pre-existing. A lot of historical trauma, a lot of addiction, alcoholism, neglect, different things like that. So we're already a bruised society, so to speak. And when these incidents come into our neighborhoods, what it did was it opened up our communities for sexual exploitation of women. The LGBTQ community was exploited. Our children, we have poverty rates that are higher than, in the North Dakota, South Dakota region, that are higher in our area than any place in the country. So when you're talking about people that are more worried about their next meal, and all of a sudden you have oil field workers, and they have a lot of money, they have drugs, the exploitation went crazy overnight. Our children were targeted, our daughters were targeted, and basically with the teenage, the young women, keeping up with the Kardashians, and with that in mind, and then coming across a young oil field worker who's basically lonely and displaced and has no connection. So what started out as a lot of romantic inquiries kind of turned into more of a sexual exploitation after a period of time. So with that being said, after the drugs and the alcohol became bigger issues, then we started finding that there were people that were being abused, raped, left for dead. One of the things, I can't give you any numbers for the Bakken for our female victims, and the reason is when I was asked about this years ago, I said our numbers are unusually low for the population. So we were under the US standards at that time. And one of the questions that was brought to my attention was why? Why are you, if you have this influx of people, why do you not have a higher victimization rate for women? And the only thing I could come up with was the fact that we haven't found the bodies yet. I rationalized that thought process with the fact that most addicts, most sex workers, most runaways are all off the radar to begin with. A lot of the LGBTQ community are off the radar, especially in these really conservative areas. So with that being said, these people are already not accounted for in their own regions, and then they came up trying to, get some kind of work or whatnot from the fallout of the Bakken as well. So I think it was maybe 4 months after I had made this comment about not finding the bodies yet, there was an article that came out of a woman from South Dakota, and she had been crossing across Interstate 94 from the west end of the state to the east end of the state, and she had a domestic dispute with her boyfriend. And being mad and all, she jumped out of the car halfway through the state in the Jamestown area and caught a ride to a little more east towards the Fargo area in a small town by the name of Castleton, North Dakota. She had called her family and asked them to come and retrieve her because she was not getting back in the car with her boyfriend. And while she was waiting for a ride, somebody had hit her over the head, knocked her unconscious, and when she came to, she was in the Bakken oil fields, so she had actually went back west. The guy had kept her captive for a few days. She escaped and literally ran through an open field, only half dressed, and was discovered by a local farmer who helped her out and took her to the Williston Police Department to file a report. And this is what I mean by the judicial system and law enforcement not being ready for what was going on up there. Rather than get her victim services, they ran a background check on her and found out that she had a moving violation ticket from 2007, I believe, and that she had an outstanding warrant in Grand Forks County, or Ward County in Minot. So rather than make a report or get her any services, what happened was they booked her, threw her in jail, and transported her to Ward County at the next available transfer. When she got to Ward County, one of the officers realized that this woman was definitely damaged and in some pain, so they sent her to the hospital, and they found out she had a broken arm and a concussion. And so that's kind of how this whole thing played out. When you come from a marginalized community to begin with, and if you followed the goings-on at the camp in Standing Rock, we saw a lot of ugliness come out from our government to support these large corporations. This behavior towards indigenous people has always been there. It's just that for me, for once, the outside community saw the real ugly that we know every day. So to stand in unity, and I know some of you were there or support it, to let outside people see the ugliness that we know was actually very validating for us. To hear most of our lives that, you're playing the race card, victim, you like to play the victim role and whatnot. When you've got 15,000 people standing behind you from all races and cultures, and you're there for one common thing, to protect our Mother Earth that we are so connected to. The camp was amazing, and the unity, there's no describing it. If you've been there, you know what I'm saying. I've never felt that kind of unity. Color didn't matter, race didn't matter, your affiliation with whatever group, your gender, sexual identity, it didn't matter. So it was a really beautiful thing that came out of this whole oil industry. One of the issues, I think, is big oil is not accountable to anybody. And now we have a commander-in-chief who's backing them, who's not holding them liable, who's not making them accountable to the communities that they're coming in and damaging. Their purpose there is to make money at the expense of whoever gets in their way. And that was obvious. So one of the other contributing factors, I think, for indigenous people in my community and HolyElk's community and any indigenous community is that, and I had talked to Mike about this earlier, with our spirituality and our connectedness to this land, I think one of our contributing factors, what makes us a higher risk other than sexual exploitation, drugs, alcohol, any of that, is that we have this connection to our mother, the earth, and we have this sense of entitlement and safety that we feel because we protect her and we believe that she's protecting us. However, big oil and all these other major industries that are moving into our protected lands is proving to us that that might not be so. So I don't know, is there anything?
Well, HolyElk,
Yeah.
do you want to say a few more words?
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hello again. So I want to talk about the Sahnish Scouts, and I just want to share a little bit of our story. My fiance Angelo is here doing our media right now, but something was born recently out of our experience and brought us into the path of Lissa. A friend of ours had a sister who had gone missing. So Angelo and I responded just as support to go help with the search. We met Lissa at that time and just instantly connected with her. And we began pretty much immediately, shadowing Lissa. She became our mentor. Both of us, we're both very compassionate people. We both believe in doing the right thing. We both lived through camp, and we held ground until we physically couldn't anymore. So to be in this situation where, there's obviously so many things that are wrong, that are happening. We were witnessing firsthand the process that Indian people go through, Indian women, Indian men. When you go missing, there's no response, very little, if any, at all, from the authorities. That we sit at home and we watch all of these crime shows and we think, if someone steals me or steals my relative, it's going to be like CSI and there's going to be a whole team of people out searching and all of these things are going to happen. In reality, it is not that way, and I've been accused often of pulling the race card, but in reality, non-indigenous people are, white people, you're going to have people looking for you. If your daughter, your sister, or yourself, your brother, somebody goes missing, the system that is in place in this country is going to respond, and most likely in the way that you expect it to. And I'm really grateful that that's happening. But when it comes to people of color, we don't get that response. And so we have to find ways to counter that. We still have a valuable life that's missing, a person that's in danger. And so we have to think on our own feet. We have to develop, organizations like Lissa has done. This is, basically her Sahnish Scouts was born exactly out of that need, that necessity for what do we do? How do we help ourselves? And, years later now here are Angelo and I, and we have a project called the Red Ribbon Alert Project. Angelo is working on an app that's going to function basically like an Amber Alert app with a few additional modifications for our missing and murdered. So anyhow, we're just people that are seeing a need, and we're trying to fulfill that purpose. So I want to move on to the hashtag MMIW. It's getting a lot of attention, and we're really grateful that a lot of people are wondering, what does that mean? What is MMIW? It provides opportunities to talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women and how that is affecting all of us. But we, in our path, Lissa and I and Angelo, we're learning different things. We're learning that MMIW, we're in complete support of that issue, but we're finding that it's primarily more in effect in Canada. Over here in the state side, through the experience and the teachings that we've gotten through Lissa, they're finding that it's not just the women, it's the men, it's the children. And so we're expanding that. And the thing is that we want to continue to uplift and support MMIW and all the work that's happening there and shine the light on that to help them make progress in their issues. But over here, we need to find a balance of supporting them, but at the same time taking a look at ourselves in our communities and taking a realistic and honest approach to what are we really dealing with over here. Because we've got men going missing at 52% of the time, as far as just, almost equal to the women, a little bit more so. And there are children. And so there's, a lot of research that we need to do to figure out and really clearly assess what we're dealing with. So that's kind of where the direction we're heading in, is to start with that research, but at the same time, Lissa has active search cases that she's doing. So it's kind of a slow process. We don't have a lot of funding. We're very grassroots. So we have big dreams and big goals, and we're going to get there. But we're just, we're taking it as quickly as we can with the resources that we have. But there is so much work. We don't have statistics. We don't have numbers, and there are so many different reasons for that. But at the end of the day, we just need to get them. We need to get those numbers. So we've got a long road to walk. But I do feel, as a Lakota woman, I do need to say that it is very true. Now that I've thrown out there that, it is the men, it is the women, it is the children. But just because I'm a Lakota woman, I can speak on the women and tell you that throughout my life, as I've walked through my life, I have always felt like a target. I can't go anywhere in public. I have daughters, I have nieces, I have sisters. All the women in our societies. We live in a culture that romanticizes Indian women, and you see a lot of the imagery. We're half naked, we're wearing war bonnets, we've got little bikinis on, and it sexualizes us. So when they see us walking on the street, we don't get, we get a different look. We get a different look. I've always gotten a different look. I can only speak for myself, but I'm a survivor of multiple sexual assaults and sexual harassment in workplaces, just a lot of sexual violence because I'm an Indian woman. And, we've done work to fight the cultural appropriation that happens, because that is one of the key factors also to why I can't walk down. And as my daughters are growing into women, I'm afraid for them to walk down streets where the grown men will break their neck to turn around and look at my 11-year-old child who looks like she's 14 maybe. So, I do need to say that this is our reality, and it's something that you just never think that you're gonna have to live this way, but we're so accustomed to it. This is our life. We walk a very hard road, so I do need to bring attention to the fact that is our walk, that is our life as Indigenous women, and that is what MMIW, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, are. So we're targets, and moving forward, but that gets a little bit emotional for me. But this is why we do what we do. We're dealing with, with so much. We're from the beginning of all the whys. Why is this happening? And then you move through to who's helping us, who's responding to us, and there's not much there. So then you move to what can we do on our own. And Red Ribbon Alert Project is partnering with Sahnish Scouts to do. We've got a lot of things. As far even as to making change within our tribal governments and the laws that they implement, to how do we teach a whole community of people to be ready and prepared to search for your relative when nobody responds. And so there's a lot, and then there's the app, and there's a lot of different avenues that we're trying to go down. But I'm going to just pass it back over here to Michael.
Thanks, HolyElk. So get ready to ask some questions or make some comments, but I did want to ask Lissa, if you wouldn't mind, take us on the ground, give us a description of what it's like to be with you on a search.
Okay.
So we've done searches in the Badlands, in the Bakken oil fields. We've done searches, we did the Rose Downwind search in Bemidji. And we have, like he said before, we have cases all over. We've stretched outside North Dakota. So when we've had some pretty front page searches that we've been involved with or spearheaded. Rose Downwind was one in Bemidji, Minnesota. The other one was the Savannah Graywin case in Fargo. Savannah was a young pregnant mother who was abducted in her apartment building, and she was 8 months pregnant, and the woman that did this removed her child, and Savannah was found about 4 or 5 days later in the Red River. Hazley, the baby, was recovered in good shape, and she's back with her father now. So we've been involved in a lot of cases. For the most part, when people come to a search, or when you have some high-profile cases, you get a million calls, and everybody wants to be a part of it. And not too many people have search experience. However, when we go out on a search, for the most part, I will set up a time, and I ask everybody to meet at this place at this time and come ready to camp. And I say this because I've learned that no matter what kind of terrain we go in, and this is the spiritual portion of what we do, I always tell my friends, my kids, my colleagues, whoever, that the work we do and the work that HolyElk and Angelo does with us is, this is spiritually motivated. This is actually a journey. And so when you get 1,000 phone calls, how do you start weeding out who's gonna be good for this venture and who's not? One of the things I say is come prepared to camp, no matter what. So if you're from Standing Rock, I know you can hang. And so there goes half the people right there. We don't want to camp. We got kids, we got this, we got that. Well, if you really want to be in that search, you will find a way. I did. I did this starting with young kids, and we made it work. So one of the things that I say is, and when the people do show up, I say, this is a spiritual adventure. This is a spiritual battle. We're up against these other forces that have taken our loved ones or our friends' loved ones or acquaintances or our relatives from us. And so the spiritual battle began when that person went missing. When we camp, what I like to tell people is to try to center on this connectedness that I talked about earlier. When you can plug into Mother Earth and you camp, whether you're from that location or not, you can listen to the leaves. Different kinds of leaves on different trees sound different. You can, the dirt, the ground, all these things talk to you. If you spend a night and a morning waking up appreciating what's in front of you, and you connect to that, once you start walking and searching for this human person, that means that's a daughter or a son or a relative of somebody, you can tell when there's something out of the ordinary. You can tell when something's unnatural. And so what I usually do is give pointers and walk people through different parts of the first day. This is what you're looking for. Listen to them trees when the wind's blowing. Can you hear traffic nearby? What are the birds saying? And so a lot of these different aspects of a search actually contribute to why we've been successful. And I think that's our indigenous roots. But I also think a lot of people, even if you're not indigenous, you can still plug into that. You have to dig into self a lot of different characteristics come with being a good soul and having good energy and just plugging into Mother Earth and asking her to talk to you. So that is one of the things that we do on searches. And then one of the byproducts is when you have this cohesive group and you got people making food and you got this camaraderie around the campfire, there's people, it's not just, okay, search day is over, and they jump in their cars and take off. People sit around the campfire and you're going to start picking up things where, oh, did you see that pile of garbage over there? Yeah, I didn't look at it. Oh, well, you need to pay attention to that. Because when you're looking for remains, the clothing, things like that, the elements will carry that, and you will find them piled up in a corner of a gated area or along a fence line. So, we give these pointers while we're out there. So that's kind of how our searches go. Is that what you wanted me to?
Excellent, yeah,
Okay.
it's very practical.
All right. Okay.
Maybe you can even tell us about the time you were chased by a badger.
Oh, well, we've had some adventures also. So kind of acclimating myself to this land that I'm connected to out on Fort Berthold, and I actually own land out there too. During the course of our little adventures out there, one time I was in a little inlet, and I thought I saw like a squirrel-looking thing over there. And to tell you the truth, I'm not really an animal, aware person, other than that they're out there. And so I was kind of looking across this waterway, and this thing looked at me, and it sneered, and it started bickering, and I was just like, what is this thing doing, And pretty soon it started slapping its tail and coming toward me. I didn't know if it had rabies but yeah, it chased me for a good amount of time. And I was terrified. A couple other things. I had went out on, when at the very, very beginning of these adventures, I had gone to a very remote location where the next probably breathing human was about 15 miles up the canyon. It's a very remote location, and when I was walking out there by myself, I really enjoy being out there too. I happened to look up on the horizon on the top of a butte, and I thought, wow, that looks like there's something looking at me, but it blends in. It's about the same color, these napkins, the buttes, and it looked like a head sticking over. So I was looking, I kept checking it out, and pretty soon I saw this big kitty cat tail. And I thought, wow, what is that? Later on in the day, I went down quite a ways, and here's this kitty cat tail again. So I go back up top when it's getting dark, and I had told one of my uncles, I said, there's this big kitty cat tail, and it was about this color, and I couldn't see, and he said, you were being tracked by a mountain lion. And I was like, really? I didn't know they had tails for real. But yeah, so we've had some pretty outlandish little incidents like that.
Thank you, that's great. Well, we've got plenty of time for comments or questions.
I think I'd like to just say.
Oh, would you like to
one
say something?
more
Oh,
thing.
good, good.
Let me grab that water.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
I was just sitting here looking at our information that we passed out to you all, and I would like to talk a little bit more about man camps. What is a man camp?
Oh, gosh.
And why are they associated with pipelines? Why are they associated with environmental destruction and the violation of Mother Earth? Why is all of this connected, and how? So, a lot of people right now are speaking out about man camps. A lot of indigenous people who are protecting their lands and their people are talking about these man camps. A man camp is a gathering of men in whatever living conditions that they can, whether it be large tents or actual structures. They are brought in massive amounts especially when there's in Menominee, Wisconsin soon, the Back Mine 40 just got approved. There's going to be a man camp erected because they need workers. There's going to be, so there's a process that I've learned about the man camps. And I don't personally bash man camps in general, because there's a process to them that's important to understand. At the influx of the extraction, whatever kind of extraction it is from the earth that's happening, they need, the companies, they need all these workers. So they just hurry up, get them in. Like Lissa said, you've got a heartbeat, you're breathing, come on in here and work. And they pay them massive amounts of money to come. These people, these men leave their families at home, go across the country, go outside of their country to come here to work. The standards for their hiring process are very unsafe. And a lot of this extraction is happening on or near reservations, on or near communities that are already struggling from generations of genocide. We already have a lot of work to do in our lands, in our people, in our communities. And so we're very vulnerable as it is. Now you bring in these man camps and an unregulated process, and just a big group of men. They're working every day, going to bed every night. All they see is each other. A lot of bad things come from that. A lot of things that already exist, such as sex trafficking, drug trafficking, the law of supply and demand, comes into play. And so all of that is going to come, when there's a demand, the supply is going to come in. You want sex, you're going to get sex workers. Not every sex worker is unwilling or do in the sex trade because they've been forced to. There are sex workers that are chosen, that's their chosen way of life. So, we try not to villainize any one group of people, such as sex workers, such as all the men at man camps, because some of them are just good guys. They just want to make a living for their families. And so, we have relatives that have, been at the man camps that work there. So what we're trying to do is we're seeking solutions. We're identifying the problems and we're trying to seek the solutions. So sticking a target on the back of every man that works at a man camp isn't going to stop everything that's happening. Sticking a target on any one of these persons, there's no generalizing. There's no black and white. It's very complicated. But in general, the man camps come in to these communities, and when there's a boom, oil boom, the gold mining, they're coming in and they're being placed in and around communities that are already suffering, that are already struggling. So they come in, that law of supply and demand comes in, the sex trade becomes more predominant, the drug trafficking becomes more predominant, and it entangles itself with our people, with our children, with our women, with our men, with all of us. And so that happens, and then as the time goes, and this I learned from Lissa, that the example being the Bakken. 5 years ago, when there was the oil boom, this is what happened there. All of the stories that you're probably just now seeing on social media, on documentaries, the severity of it, that happened 5 years ago in the Bakken. And right now, in present day, it's not that situation. It's not where they have, where they're actually, like stealing women from the community and just taking them to these man camps. They have dispersed and grown roots into the community. There have been, there have been apartment buildings built so that they don't have the man camps. The oil workers are in the communities. They're living in the apartment buildings. They're living in the hotels. It has grown roots in the whole community. And the drug abuse, the sex trafficking, all of that has grown roots into the community. So now it's not as severe as you're going to see like in the beginning of a man camp, but it's deep and it's in the community. So now it's an even harder thing to try to face and to deal with. But that's kind of the process of it is, in the beginning it's going to be really severe like that, and then it's going to grow deep roots into that community and continue to devastate and to traumatize all of these people within this community. So, and that happens with, you know, with all of this extraction from the earth. And so we say we heal the earth, and when we heal the earth, we heal the women, and vice versa. When we heal the women, we heal the earth. I think that it's gone beyond the women now, but it's, you know, just that sense of violation that's happening to the earth, and it is happening to all of us. So I just wanted to bring it back to that, which, you know, the topic of what we're supposed to be talking about here is the oil, fracking, and man camps, human health along the pipeline. So that's kind of how it's all connected, all of these things that we're talking about. You get to see a lot of different parts of the whole process here, the search part, you know, the environmental issues, and how it's all intertwined. And so this is why we do everything that we do. We are, you know, we're water protectors also. And this is why we stand so strong against these companies who are coming in to destroy the earth and to contaminate our water, because we know that once it's, you know, there's no more. Once it's polluted, what are we going to do? What are the animals going to do? So it's all connected, and we could talk circles around it all, but I'm going to go ahead and pass it over for questions.
Yeah, one more too. We're just going to keep going back and forth. So I'd like to give a little addendum to that whole situation about the man camps as well. I don't want to be totally negative about the man camps. I want to make it clear that in the very beginnings of this organization and the efforts that we were making, I actually stayed in the man camps when I traveled to Fort Berthold from Fargo. I did my searches every weekend. And for the record, one of my first cases was actually a young missing white male with roots in Washington who went missing, who had reestablished himself in Texas and went missing in North Dakota. So I stayed in the man camps. Some of the companies there was aware of the work I was doing, and they saw a need. I want to make it real clear that when there's that much money flying around, a lot of people put blinders on out in the oil communities. Out of sight, out of mind, not my problem. Stay in your lane. Those are common practices. So kind of on the down low, this company put me up in a cabin that they had for rent that normally rents for about $180 a night. And they rented it to me for $20 a night usually on a Friday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I could continue to find justice for this initial case. And if you ever want to look it up, his name was Casey, the letter K and C, Clark with an E. And we did get justice for him, but we have not located his body. The land had changed so many times since 2012 that when they actually this was a murder for hire scheme, and there was actually connections to Chicago in this scheme. And the hitman was out of Spokane, Washington. Later found another front man for this company and reached out to him and tried to tell him to please leave these people alone. I'm afraid for your life. His name was Doug Carlisle out of Spokane, another investor. And Doug was an older gentleman who invested everything, his entire retirement, everything. Couldn't see walking away out of this situation. Wanted to salvage what he could. And within a month, he was also dead. The roots are deep. I mean, we got cartel up there. We have West Coast gangs. We got East Coast gangs. We got mafia, all kinds of different mafia. We've got Bosnian mafias, and we've got Italian, and we've got some African community, and all these people have interests in oil. So the man camps, very unregulated, and it's the money flying around. And so when these opportunists seen a way to make money, even locals involved in this, they would put out electric and water lines and rent a spot for a shack for $1,200 a month in their backyard. That's how these man camps started. They haven't said anything like officially like, hey, we support these guys, because the last thing they want to do is get on the bad side of big oil, because those are their major customers. And when you got 230 units at $180 a night, they ain't trying to make anybody angry. So, but they do support my work. Everything's kind of on a hush-hush, but we do what we do. So I just wanted to let you know that portion. Also, when these man camps were there, some of our best volunteers came from the man camps. I want to make that clear, that not every single person that came out of a man camp was an awful heathen, pedophilic, addicted, whatever. There were good people there. And unfortunately for us, a lot of those that were part of our Sahnish Scouts team, and still are really, have moved to other oil field regions, which at first we were very disappointed about. But now we have eyes and ears in other parts of the country too, since our work is going outside of North Dakota. So I just wanted to make that clear, not everybody from the man camp. Thank you.
It looks like we have time,
I'm going to spill it, what?
20, 25 minutes for questions or comments. Go ahead. I don't know if I have help with, okay, in the back there.
Hi, thank you both for coming. We had a keynote speaker last night, former EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy, who said the Obama administration made major strides in bringing issues in Native American communities to light. I don't know how that translates to your actual experiences with you or the communities you work with. So if you could give some insight into that.
I can't give you any more insight than to what I witnessed. My former occupation before I just decided to do this full time was that I was a welder out of Fargo, and I took this job on a conditional basis that I will not be ever at any time subjected to working on oil field products. So I did structural welding. But because of where I worked, I was privy to seeing what kind of things were going on. One of the things we're working on were these Poseidon tanks and these frack tanks. I do know the EPA stepped in. We got these wide open flares that were going on. They started making sure that they were off the ground when we would drive past an oil pad, and we're talking prairie grasslands here. And the flares would be about 18 inches out of the ground. And so you wonder why we're having wildfires all over the place. Doesn't take a scientist to figure that out, but I know that EPA stepped in and started regulating some of that. One of the other things was that we had these open air frack tanks. So what happens in the hot baking sun? It starts evaporating this brine into our atmosphere, and then the locals are drinking, or not drinking it, but breathing it. So I know the EPA stepped in and started making regulations, because we started making the clips to cover these open air frack tanks that they once told us were totally safe. And so I know the EPA has done some things in Indian country, because for the most part, being unregulated and that sovereignty, some of our tribal leaders are able to make deals, inside deals with the oil companies to exploit our own land. And I'm just being real about that. When you come to an impoverished community, it's like making a deal with the devil. And so you're going to try whatever you can if you think it's going to make your community better or more financially stable. So I know that there was points in time where the EPA did step in, and I actually heard that or witnessed it from some of the oil companies while I was out there doing searches. So I ended up networking with a lot of these oil companies. But yes, I do remember that. They did step in. and started some types of regulation. I think there was even a clarification of what their responsibilities government-wise in Indian country actually were, because those were kind of gray areas until that time.
I think that, is it Gina? I think that she spoke in a lot of detail about what has been done in the Obama administration, and the progress that was made, the intentions that were set, some of the programs that were that had began at that time during that administration. As far as to how the impact it has truly had on indigenous people in our lands, all you need to do is look on any, probably not mainstream media, but social media. Our lands are being violated. Our waters are being contaminated. We are having to take it upon ourselves to stand in defense of the water and the earth and our sacred sites at the cost of going to jail. So as to the proof being in the pudding, I don't feel that, it has had, why are we having to take it into our own hands and risk our freedom and our lives for the Environmental Protection Agency to really be, are they doing anything? Maybe they're doing some things, but how it translates into our everyday life, we're having to get up and to fight. As a mother, I had to think about my daughter, who's 11 years old. I potentially may not be able to finish raising my child because I want her to have water. I want her kids to have water. I want them to have clean air to breathe. So that's our reality. That's our everyday life, state to state, coast to coast, no matter what direction you look in. So that, I think that should speak for itself as far as to how effective they're being.
That was a good comeback.
Anyone else? Any other questions or comments?
This is probably a very naive question. But what interest has the mainstream media shown about taking on the story of the Indian women missing, and when all the news media was on last year about the pipeline, there was no mention of any of this. So where has the mainstream media been? Social media is fine, okay, to an extent, but where is the mainstream media showing any spying on this?
They're just not doing it. They're not responding. They're all connected. They're all dependent on each other in this bigger system that we call America. And their survival is dependent on operating within their boundaries. And for them to really show the truth of what's happening in our everyday lives that affects all of us would be detrimental to their own survival, I guess. I can't really pretend to make excuses for them, but that's what the reality is. They're not covering it. They're not shining light on what's happening to the people.
I want to say something. So, I can't see you. Oh, I'd just like to say, just for missing persons in general, out of anybody in here, if you think for 1 minute that you're going to make a phone call to the police and they're all going to jump in their cars and come running to the rescue, you're sadly mistaken. That's Hollywood. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of times that you'll have a missing person and you'll call law enforcement and they'll mistakenly tell you that there's a waiting period. The 24 hours, 48, 72. That's Hollywood. And even the police believe that. So a lot of times I'll have to download the code or the statute and I'll send it to the family and say, you go make your report in person, and you tell them, and bring a recorder with you. And you show them the statute and you tell them that they need to take your report. And I do that for a lot of reasons because, for one thing, when it comes especially to Native Americans, and this is so common practice. Rose Downwind went missing on, say, day one. Her mother reported her missing within 4 hours. She had 5 children. The police in Bemidji told her that she had a waiting period. So she waited. She calmly as possible, when she knew in her heart something was wrong, waited that waiting period. And when she called back, law enforcement said, yeah, downwind, huh? And this is Dennis Banks' granddaughter? Okay, well, she's probably out partying. Give her another week or so to come home. When in all actuality, she was murdered by her children's father. And had they went and looked, they probably would have found her in the basement of that house that day. And by the time a search was initiated by Sahnish Scouts, it was almost a month later. And it was actually remarkable. We put a call out. We used social media to our advantage. We actually had people that hitchhiked to Bemidji from South Dakota, Canada, Wisconsin, and we had 300 searchers. And so we found a lot of things, and the BCI and local law enforcement were kind of surprised that we picked up that torch regardless of what they wanted. And I find a lot of times law enforcement doesn't know what to do. And I'm not making excuses for them, but they don't know a protocol, and that's things that need to be developed. A lot of communities don't have that. So eventually Rose was recovered about 5 weeks later, and she was buried north of Bemidji. So with that being said, I mean, there is no call unless the people, if you arm yourself with knowledge, because more and more with every passing day, one of you is going to come in contact with someone. This is going to affect you personally. I used to be a helper, and only a helper. A year ago, I ended up having to do, during this Morton County Standing Rock issue, my own niece went missing, and the call went through Morton County, and we got the same thing too. Probably drinking, and a stereotype. She's probably drinking or drugging, and give her some time to come home. A month later, I had to go to another reservation and get her myself. And she was deceased. She had been out there. So, I mean, I tell people all the time, you might think you're immune. I thought I was. I thought I had like some pre-atoned situation that I would never be going through this personally. But I did, and I'm telling you, you will too. You will too. So the only way you can arm yourself is with knowledge. Learn your codes, learn your missing person protocol, because I guarantee you, you will be the ones educating law enforcement. I just stand up to look at that.
This is someone on the right here and also in the back, in the middle.
So when you're taking steps to make, or when you're trying to make steps to take preventative measures to stop the spillover effects from these man camps, do you find that it's more successful to work with the communities that are coming in, or try and create more separation? To just like say like, don't, like, you do you, we'll do us, or trying to cooperate within them?
I'm going to go with cooperation 100%. And the reason why I say that is because the more networking you do in these man camps, the more eyes and ears you have in those man camps. So with the blinder situation, maybe people in that certain man camp don't want to take the action, they don't want to take responsibility, and they surely don't want to be labeled as some kind of a snitch. Because people lose jobs over that. And so we take the information, and we have quite a reputation that we do not expose the people who confidently give us information. But with that being said, in networking further, what I do is I usually approach the man camp and ask them who's in charge of this man camp, whose oil field business is running people through here. And I'll approach the management, the oil field companies. I'll make phone calls, write letters. What responsibility? Because in these other situations that HolyElk was talking earlier about the other lines and the minings that are going to happen, I'm not saying don't resist. I'm 100% resisting on any of these things. But what do we have as a backup plan to hold these people accountable when that line does go through? We're over here arguing and fighting about, rights of way and whatever. In the meantime, what kind of a protocol are we going to develop? Because if those camps are going to come through, who's going to be responsible for the backlash and the aftermath of that? So 100% cooperation, 1,000% information gathering, if you will. Here you go.
Mentioned earlier that you felt that at times you didn't have the appropriate information, maybe data or numbers, that sort of thing. Do you have any higher education institution upon which you can call to get that sort of information? A local institution.
Well, not so much local, but we had a really amazing meeting this morning and have built alliances with some of the folks here at Loyola that are doing some research and what is the name of the program?
ECIS, whatever.
Yeah,
No,
the Beacon,
Yes.
the Beacon Project.
The Beacon
Beacon
Project.
Project.
They're doing, yeah, it was a really amazing to hear about the work that they're doing, and it's in alignment with what we're doing, and we're all heading in the same direction. So it's just a continuation of building bridges like that, creating alliances of similar people, because this is not something fun. This is not something, as a little kid, you say, I want to, well, I can't say that because we do, Lissa encourages on searches for parents to bring their children. So I brought my daughter, and she wants to grow up and search for people. So it is something that, that you can aspire to be. But, it's just that it's such a dark area of life. It's a dark reality of our life that we're responding to it, we're reacting to it, and we're trying to move into proactivity. But without that data, that information, and that research, it's really hard to get a grasp of exactly what we're facing and what tactics do we need to use to move forward towards resolution.
Anybody else? More questions? Dr. Tuckman?
A quick question.
Okay.
Sorry. In our culture today, broader for the United States, we're seeing with a lot of the school shootings, almost all of them are perpetrated by males. And a lot of these man camps, the sexual violence and the murders perpetrated by males. In this culture of toxic masculinity that results in these awful issues that we shouldn't have to deal with, what wisdom from your indigenous traditions might you be able to share for us to build a healthier masculinity?
You want to talk on that?
Yeah.
Maybe you should have
Sure.
Angelo.
That's a wonderful question. Thank you for that. Toxic masculinity is really the people's enemy in our society, and it affects indigenous folks as well. It is a huge part of our culture as well. But so as indigenous people, we are making strides to return to our original way of life, pre-genocide. So as a people, I guess all we can do is lead by example. Regardless of what indigenous nation you go to, we all kind of have the basic same instructions. You know, we're taught compassion for other humans. We're taught to be good people. We're taught to love each other, to take pity on each other, to have faith. You know, and it's spoken in our native tongues, these directions for living our life. And, you know, I guess I don't know much about organized religion, you know, Catholicism or whatever, but from my understanding, it's basically the same thing. Is, you know, you're taught to be a good person. But there were also, in indigenous culture, there were kinship rules of being a man, being, you know, from every stage of life, from being a little boy to, you know, as you progress and throughout your life, there are different ceremonies, there are different, you know, the parents and the community is tending to that little boy's spirit, and they're teaching him in every process, this is how you do this part of this next phase of your life. These are the expectations, this is what our society enforces. And so that's traditional, that's where we want to go, that's where we want to be. We're very far from that, because in order to truly, I mean, I can walk in my life in the teachings that my great-grandmothers down to my mother have given me, and be the kind of woman that they've taught me to be. But if I'm not living in an environment that, you know, where I'm the minority of, you know, just which is what it is. You know, there's a lot of good indigenous people that are really living this way, that are really walking the walk. But our communities are so impacted by the stealing of our culture, by the genocide, by everything that has happened to us. We're trying to get back to that. So I wish that, and I really feel like, you know, it's our responsibility to take care of ourselves and to reach out and help other people when we can. But right now, there's just been so much generational damage that we're just really trying to heal our nations and to take on the responsibility of teaching other people, I think, is a lot, but definitely it is a model to emulate, to look towards, because it was a really healthy matriarchal society that we lived in. Everyone was in balance. The women, like I said, mentioned about the boys, the women, little girls, same thing. And I don't talk about the specific, you know, rites of passage at whatever time, because those kind of things belong to our people, but it is a whole lifelong process. So coming in as adults, damaged adults, we've missed out on a lot of the grooming that happens from birth and all of the teachings. So we're all kind of in a struggle, and I would, you know, look to your brothers, whatever color they may be, look to the other men who are setting examples to step outside of that toxic masculinity within themselves, and are setting standards to be better than that. But I appreciate that question, because it's very, very big in our society right now, and it's destroying a lot of parts of us.
I would like to add something to working or living part-time at the man camp myself because of my volunteer work, but also having a supervisor whose sister owned the ambulance company out in the Bakken. I would just like to say that this toxic relationship also affected the people in the man camps. There was a single ambulance unit that serviced the Newtown area, and find out through my personal experiences of working and living there that it was not uncommon for multiple suicides to take place at one time in a 100-unit man camp. My supervisor, my welding supervisor's sister owned the company, so once I heard some of the things that were going on, I reached out to her because I was interested in the effects that it was happening to even the non-indigenous. Now, people that were living in these man camps. It was not uncommon for the ambulance to respond to a suicide in the man camp and then pile 3 people in there trying to save them all. And they had to prioritize per toxicity level, best guess at toxicity level, who was likely to survive. And we'll take these 3, because we got 1 on each side and 1 on the floor of this ambulance, and hope that these 2 other ones survive by the time we can make it back. And there was a lot of times on the second trip to retrieve the last 2 where 1 of them or 2 of them didn't make it. So the whole dynamic of the evil forces that take place in these man camps are also affecting the people that are working there. So then which opens up a whole new door. There's a lot of people that are being occupationally trafficked into these jobs. There was a lot of people that were lured into the Bakken region and owed tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, in wages and investments or what have you. And these people disappeared. Now, most of them were recovered, but that's how people make money. There's a lot of bilking and pilfering and all kinds of things. So that's just another one of the evil forces that surround the oil companies and the goings on, the happenings of that.
We're at 4:17, but maybe we could have one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. I don't know who's next.
Yes, I'm Claire Tobin. I'm a mother of a Loyola alum and also live in the community. So I just wanted to add to the gentleman's question about what the solutions were to all of this dysfunction in society. And I just bowled over by this new book. It's called Lost Connections by Johann. I don't know if anybody else has been familiar with it. Go read it. Go get your family to read it. Go get everybody. It just goes on a journey begins with kind of researching the causes of depression and goes on from there to really the disconnections in society and what will heal everyone from every aspect, from loss of meaningful work, loss of connections with other people, loss of connection with nature, loss created through childhood trauma, and what then gets to the solution. So make it part of your book club, and it's wonderful. It will give you hope.
Cool.
Well, this has been a very informative and moving session. I want to thank all of you for being here and being so attentive. And please join me in thanking Lissa and HolyElk.
Yeah. Curtsy. Go ahead, curtsy. Aw. Oh, wow. That's awesome. Come on, boy. Come on. Yeah, you got it. Thank you. Thank you all so much.